Hello, welcome to Two Rivers Tuesday. We are back for a little summer series. I'm here with John T. How are you?
I'm doing good.
Good. How's your summer so far?
I feel like it's waiting to begin.
Oh.
I guess, so Katie just is wrapping up work at the school, and so I like to say I got my summer wife back, and I love my summer wife. I love my wife all the time, but summer wife is great, and so we're getting ready to have some family vacation time. We're going camping.
Oh, fun.
So that'll be fun. Yeah. And so I would say summer is about to be great.
Yeah, that's awesome.
Yeah. How about you guys?
We started summer off big time. Like the hour that Ellis got done with her little preschool, we left that very minute for
Hit
the
the
beach.
road.
Yes.
I love that.
Yes, it was a fun way to start the summer. So we've already done the beach, we've done fishing, we've done the pool, we've just like already jumped all the way into summer.
You've done it all.
So fun. Yes.
Yes.
I've already got sunburned, of course.
It's great.
Yes.
The kids are like, all right, now what? We summered.
I know.
Now what are we doing?
Like a lot more of this to go.
A lot more of the same. Yeah.
All right. Well, welcome. We are going to do this little series this summer with a book club that we're doing. So tell us a little bit about what the book is and how this is going to work, John.
Yeah. Well, we've never really done this before, but we're recommending that our church family read Practicing the Way by John Mark Comer. Subtitle is Be with Jesus, Become Like Him, and Do as He Did. And so as we sort of read this together over the summer, we thought it might be good to have a conversation about this. So on our Two Rivers Tuesday podcast, instead of working through the sermons that we're going to be walking through this summer, we thought we'd talk a little bit about this book, sort of a little special mini series.
Yeah. So if you haven't picked it up, order yourself a copy and start reading. We're going to we have a schedule that's out that you can find to kind of follow along. If you want to go ahead and listen to this, listen and enjoy the conversation and then read it as you want. But there is a little bit of a schedule that I think would be most beneficial if you want to follow it. But even if not, still listen to the conversation. I think there'll be lots to kind of glean from, even if you're not able to read it.
Agreed. And I would just say that this is the material is challenging to me. It has been challenging to me. However, it is an easy read.
I agree.
Just the way it's written, the way it's presented on the page. I mean, it's easy to read, but it is very thought-provoking and challenging to think about.
Yeah. And also, pro tip, if you like to listen and you have Spotify Premium, you can listen to this book. It's on there, available for you to listen to. But yeah, we just thought it would be super helpful for our whole church family to have read this book so that we can kind of have a shared understanding and a little bit of like a shared language around these concepts and ideas. And we feel like if we all have read this, there will be something that we can kind of unify around these truths and concepts and move forward together with these understandings.
Yeah, this is sorry, I'm going to interrupt you.
Because
this is going to kind of set us up for the fall when we begin to look at Jesus' Sermon on the Mount. We'll start that kind of the middle of August or so. And Jesus, I think some of the questions that we will be asking and can be asking as we read this book is, what is the gospel that Jesus proclaimed?
Yeah.
What is Jesus's gospel? What do we read in the gospels, the accounts of Jesus's life? And when he came on the scene and began to preach, what was he preaching? What was he calling people to? I think, and we're going to talk about it today a little bit more, but what does it mean to accept Jesus's gospel, to believe it, and then to walk in it, to follow him? What does it mean to follow Jesus? And I think Comer has done a really good job of helping just sort of break it down, but also challenge our Western evangelical Christian view of what it means to be a Christian, kind of air quotes.
Yes. Yeah. I think that's great. I have read this book and you have already. And for me, kind of what it did in my heart was just made me so hopeful and excited for what life with Jesus can look like and how I can be changed by that. And so for the idea of that happening for so many people in our church family is really exciting to me, that we would all have this like renewed hope about the type of people Jesus can transform us into. That makes me excited.
That's a really beautiful way of saying that. I'm going to say it in a much less beautiful way. as I read this book, I thought, I want that. It's that line that I say all the time from Napoleon Dynamite. Like when that lady, I think she's looking at I don't know if it's the sailboat or the Tupperware collection, and
I want that.
She's like, I want that. And
yes.
And like I was just reading this, and as he's articulating this life of following Jesus, being an apprentice to Jesus, I just thought, gosh, I want that.
Yes.
I want, and that I have tasted that, and yet I want more of that. And I think that's my hope for us as a people, as a church, but also for us individuals, that we would want more of that, that we would love Jesus so much, that we would want to do whatever he said.
Yes.
And that we would believe that we can be with him.
Yes.
And that we can become like him. And that we can do the things he did.
Yes. Yeah. And I feel like it's important to really believe that really is possible.
Yes.
So just from like my personal experience, I listened to this book for the first time, maybe like a few months ago even. And I just slowly but surely have started kind of trying to walk into these things. And I already am starting to experience some of the joy and fruit that can come from these things. And so I just say that to encourage you to listen to the book, read the book, like get in on this, because what you're longing for and some of the fruit that you're maybe aching for is really possible. And I have gotten to experience that, and I want more and more people to get to experience it too. So today we're going to talk about part 1 of the book. And so this kind of first part of the book, he is setting up what an apprentice of Jesus is. So John, tell us a little bit about what is the difference between a Christian and an apprentice.
Oh gosh. Well, he does a great job of sort of helping sort of distinguish these things. We often think of a Christian as someone who, what's the word I'm looking for? Adheres to a certain belief system outlined in the Bible, about God and man and Jesus dying to make a way for men and women, mankind to be reunited with God. That's like this system of belief, right? And it's like, oh yeah, I'm a Christian because I believe that there's a God, and I believe that, Jesus was his son, and for God to love the world, John 3:16. But then what Comer does a great job in this book of is showing us that like that mental comprehension is important, but then there's this actual following Jesus and learning to be like him and to do what he did that is sadly missing in our Christian culture of the day, especially in our country. And just think about even our culture in the Southeast. Are we really following Jesus so closely that we would say that we are apprenticing under him, learning how to do what he did, becoming like him? I mean, Comer talks about how Jesus was a rabbi, and every rabbi had a following, and they had a particular way that they taught in a particular curriculum that they taught. And if you were a disciple, a learner of that rabbi, you were learning their kind of like their curriculum and becoming like them, like your rabbi. And Jesus talks all about that. That language is all through in the Gospels.
Yeah, and I feel like it was helpful to learn about what the Jewish like educational system looked like. That it wasn't just about like learning to like memorize certain facts or like adhere to just like a cognitive level understanding. But when you were to follow a rabbi, you were following them so closely that you would be like covered in their dust, which is how he opens the book, was may you be covered in the dust of your rabbi. And it's that concept that like you're following them so closely that like your life is like covered by their life almost, and you're becoming like them. And everything about their life is what you're starting to practice, not just say like, I mentally agree that that is true. So I feel like there's this helpful distinction between kind of what you were saying, like, is it just like I could check, yes, I agree to like this statement of faith, or am I reorganizing my entire life to follow him and do the things he did and be with him and become like him, which is how the book kind of is broken down. And so what are the dangers if we don't understand that distinction? Like if we think, okay, I can be a Christian and just check the box that I believe. What happens if we don't ever actually follow Jesus? We just check the box, I believe.
Yeah. Gosh. Well, I think the worst danger would be that one day we come face to face with Jesus and he says, I never knew you. And maybe we get to that. That's right there at the end of the Sermon on the Mount in Matthew 7. That would be the worst thing possible.
Yes.
But you back up from there and you just think, well, you're going to miss out on the transformational aspect of the life that is being a follower of Jesus, a disciple of Jesus, an apprentice of Jesus, right? And so you miss out on that hope and that peace and that greater joy and the fruit of the Spirit of Christ in you that's growing, and love, joy, peace, patience, kindness, goodness, gentleness, faithfulness. It's one thing to say, yes, I believe in all these things, but to not follow after him is to miss out on all the goodness of having a relationship with him. Yeah. Right? How would you answer that?
Yeah, I feel like one thing that came to mind is it's very confusing to the watching world. It's like they, and I don't want to be negative, so just give me grace, listeners, but like it's confusing for there to be a huge portion of our country that claims to be Christian, yet the lives don't look like Jesus.
Yes.
And so that's not like modeling to the world, this is what life in the kingdom looks like, and this is what Jesus was like, and this is what his followers are like. Because if you're just saying I'm a Christian and that's the extent of the change or the extent of like the fruit in your life is just like that title, then the world misses out on seeing the beauty of what it can look like to live and be part of the kingdom of God. And that confuses them because it's like, well, why would they want that? You know what I mean? Yes. Like that's not a very compelling picture to the lost and dying world, if it's just like, oh, is that what a Christian is? But the flip side is like, if we are people who really are following Jesus, really apprentice his way of life, start spending time with him, doing the things he did, looking more and more like him day by day, and we get to enjoy the fruit of what that will bring to our lives, that is such a compelling picture to the lost and dying world of like, oh, that's what the kingdom of God looks like. Oh, that person really does have a peace and a joy and a steadiness that I want and that can only come from following Jesus. That is so compelling to the world, I feel like.
I would add one more thing to that question. And I have seen in my life of ministry, people who have walked away from the faith and basically have said some version to me of Jesus just didn't work for me, and I think that a big part of that was that they were kind of brought into the fold with some kind of message that spoke a lot about grace and about your need for salvation, and spoke a lot about heaven and hell, but never continued with now take up your cross and follow me.
Yes.
And never transitioned into habits that change, reorganizing your life around this new reality of your faith in Jesus Christ. And so they prayed a prayer. They did a repeat after me. Maybe it was an awkward social situation, or maybe they in that moment were really stirred and they raised their hand, when every head was bowed and every eye was closed, and they raised their hand thinking like, oh, I don't want to go to hell, but they never like walked with Jesus.
Yes.
And spent time with him and followed him and surrendered to him. And so they end up kind of like eventually abandoning it. But what they abandoned isn't really what Jesus had in mind when he called people to follow him.
Yeah.
So
they never fully tasted the life that Jesus was offering them.
Yes.
And so of course that's something you would want to walk away from, because it's like, this isn't working for me. Yet what Jesus calls us into, if you like fully walk into that, it is what you want more of, and like it is the life we all ache for. Kind of what you were getting at reminds me of this part in the book where he calls it kind of like the John 3:16 gospel.
Okay.
And I have this quote in here that I thought was really helpful. He says, contrary to what many assume, Jesus did not invite people to convert to Christianity. He didn't even call people to become Christians. He invited people to apprentice under him into a whole new way of living, to be transformed. And then he also kind of talks about this idea of, I feel like sometimes we unintentionally separate Jesus's death from his life. And so we want to just receive kind of what his death will give us. And we think that's it, that it kind of ends there. And that's our get out of hell free card, kind of like what you mentioned. And we miss out on all that the life he lived and his resurrection has to offer us for our life. I feel like it's easy to think like, okay, I'm a Christian, that changed my eternal destiny, and that's it. I'm not going to hell anymore. Yet we miss out on all that Jesus is inviting us into in this life. Does that make sense?
Absolutely.
So talk a little bit about like, what is that maybe John 3:16 gospel, and how does that sound or work itself out a little bit?
Well, I think you did a great job sort of explaining that. I think that, John 3:16 is a powerful proclamation of the truth of God's love.
Yes.
And the way he made for us to no longer perish, eternally, but have life eternally. Like that's the promise. That promise is in Jesus Christ. And that is so important,
Yes.
right? Like we are not in any way like putting down John 3:16.
Right, exactly, yes.
And yet if it's just like a, like kind of like a bumper sticker for you, or it's like a sort of a cultural mantra, or it's even how, unfortunately in today's world, like how you sort of line up politically or on values, like your value system or your morals, it won't be enough. It won't be enough because Jesus then calls you to pick up your cross and follow him, to die, to deny yourself and follow him. And your life should look different from that point on.
Yeah. But as I was reading this book, I was really thankful for the fact that our church has tried to push into this already by having what we call our covenant practices. So like when we agree so strongly with this idea that we're not just asking our members to check the box that they mentally agree, but we're also asking our members to start walking this out and commit to practicing these things, because we know that Jesus is not just asking you to like say, yes, I believe. He's also asking you to follow him with your whole life. And so our covenant practices are kind of those things that we're saying these are like starting points for restructuring and organizing your whole life around following him. Because if we want to be the people he's calling us into, and we want to embody our values as a church, that happens as we practice these things and as we kind of structure our life to do that.
Yes. Okay, so I put a big red box around something on page 16.
Okay.
Just right out of the gate, right here at the beginning of the book. He writes, "The problem is, in the West, we've created a cultural milieu where you can be a Christian but not be an apprentice of Jesus. And we've been talking about that. We've been getting around that, just your question about the John 3:16 gospel, and the difference between Christian and disciple or apprentice, as he uses a lot in this book. But I think that really is a culture that we are living in. You can be a Christian, but not actually follow Jesus. Yes. Or at least that's what we've been told and sold, and what's even been modeled for us. And he goes into talking about it. And he even goes into some of the history of it. I don't remember exactly where, I remember him saying something about kind of post World War II, just a movement in the evangelical Christian world in America that stuck with me because I love World War II history. But he talks about just this reality. And I don't know if it has to do with the kind of the Crusades, and then even just some of the what another author has called decisionism, where it's just like, I made a decision. I've chose to follow. I have decided to follow Jesus, which is interesting because not everyone who has said that is actually following Jesus, And I don't sit here and say that like I'm crushing it, at completely following Jesus the way he's called us to. I do not like to deny myself, okay? That's why I'm still reading this book, like I'm still learning how to follow Jesus, even though I've been walking with him now for, 25 years. I'm still learning how to follow him in more ways. I need my affections to be stirred for him, because every day my attention gets pulled in a thousand other directions that aren't Jesus, and I choose things that I think will satisfy me that aren't Jesus. And so I still have so far to go the rest of my life here, learning how to follow him. So I don't want to sound like I'm pointing fingers at people. I'm really wanting to expose this idea that this is a problem, that you can be a Christian and not be an apprentice. Yeah. And I just want to go back to what I said, because it's so important. It's what Jesus said when he said, not all who say to me, Lord, Lord, will enter the kingdom of heaven. He may say to some, I never knew you. You checked Christian on a box. Yeah. But you never got up and started to follow me. Yeah.
Yeah. I feel like the way I've always thought about it is like, okay, you make that decision and you become a Christian. And then later on, if you want to kind of take it to the next level, you can become a disciple by like being discipled by someone.
Yeah, that's next level Christianity.
Yes. And so I feel like there's this lie that like, okay, discipleship or being a disciple is for the really mature or for someone who's like extra serious about it, but that doesn't have to be for everyone. And I think what he's trying to call our attention to is like, no, those are not two different things. Right. If you are truly a Christian, you will be a disciple. You will be someone who's apprenticing Jesus. You will be someone who's really following him. But I feel like we like kind of separate it out and make that two different things, like level 1 and then level 2. Yeah. And so it's helpful for me to realize like, okay, no, like a Christian will be a disciple. And he has this whole line about like a disciple is a noun and not a verb. And I feel like that's really helpful because I've been in cultures and have even probably said the words like, that person just needs to be discipled, or I need someone to disciple me. And I feel like that language isn't actually all that helpful because you're putting the responsibility on someone else, and he calls
to disciple you.
Yes. And so, but in reality, like it's really not John Teague's responsibility to disciple me. It's my responsibility to follow Jesus. Like I am a disciple, and I like learn from my rabbi Jesus. Yes. And it's not like your fault if I'm not following him because you didn't disciple me. That's right. I think that can be a huge point of like frustration and hurt and bitterness for people people is they felt like they never got discipled, or I've even put this pressure on myself at times to disciple other people. Like I'm responsible for them following Jesus. But I feel like understanding that a disciple is a noun. It's who you are. If you truly are a Christian, you will be a learner of his way. And so that frees everyone up. Like it's not your responsibility. It's not my responsibility. Like we all as Christians have to take that responsibility to follow our rabbi seriously and be covered in his dust and like do the things he did and be with him and become like him. Okay.
So is there a danger then in, and this is a leading question, I'm setting you up, in this whole, as we talk about like if it almost seems like we're talking like John 3:16 isn't enough, it's like, it's not enough to just believe, like you need to also follow and be like and do. Does that sound like works-based righteousness? Is that like works-based salvation? Is that like legalism?
No. Just no. I feel like it is. There has been such an emphasis on pushing against works-based righteousness. And I totally get like the need for that and the truth in that. I feel like it has done us such a disservice, because anytime we feel a push or a challenge or even a conviction to put more effort into following Jesus, we quickly dismiss that as like, well, I don't want to be legalistic. And we're missing out on the life Jesus has for us when we're not willing to take responsibility to truly follow him and to practice what he's calling us to and to do the things he did. Legalism is when you think doing those things will earn you more favor in God's eyes.
Yes.
And so I just think we have misunderstood what legalism is. That's like a big label we really quickly put on things that are not actually legalism. And so when we put that label on, we're like, oh, we don't want any of that. But I feel like we're mislabeling a lot of things. Legalism is if you're trying to earn God's favor by what you're doing. What this book and kind of what we're advocating for and what we're wanting to do more of and invite you listeners into is following Jesus and putting effort into following him and practicing his way because you love him. And if you love someone, of course you want to like follow them. And like Jesus is so worth following and so worth putting effort into spending time with him and becoming like him.
Yeah, I'm thinking about, and I think it's in the book, and I believe it's Dallas Willard who said this, but grace is not opposed to effort.
Yes.
It's opposed to earning.
Yes.
Grace is opposed to earning, but it is certainly not opposed to effort. Even the Apostle Peter, who followed Jesus closely, said, I think, make every effort.
Yes.
And I think it's either in 1 Peter, 2 Peter, maybe in 2 Peter. He's like, make every effort to continue to grow in these things.
Yeah.
So there is an effort that we need to make.
Yes.
The Apostle Paul talks about it in Philippians. I think it's Philippians chapter 2, where Paul says, work out your salvation with fear and trembling.
Yes.
But then he says, for it is God who's working in you. So who's at work here? Both of us.
Yes, both.
Right?
Yeah.
Right. Work out your salvation, but know that it is God who is at work in you.
Yes.
So there is something to us putting effort into learning more about who Jesus is.
Yeah.
And following him.
Yes. Yeah. And I feel like the reality is everyone listening to this podcast is already putting effort into something. You're already practicing something. You're already being discipled by something.
Yes.
And so what this book invites you into is like, make sure you're being discipled by the only one worthy of being discipled by.
Yes.
Because so often we are discipled by the content on our phones. We're discipled by the people around us, the influencers, the political party we follow, the shows we watch, like you name it. We are all being discipled by someone or something or an idea. And so what we want to make sure of is that we're shifting and only following Jesus because he's the only one worth following. And he's the only one that when we follow him, it will lead to the life that we're longing for.
Yes. I was looking for the next quote, and I totally agree with all of that.
Do you want to read that Screw Tape Letters quote?
Yeah.
Kind of in closing, that would be helpful.
Yeah. So what's going to change this? Like what takes us from like, I trust and I believe, and I want to, it's like in our Dangerous Prayer series back in January, I believe, help my unbelief.
Yeah.
Lord Jesus, I do believe you are the Messiah. You are the one. And I trust you. And I know that you died for my sin. How do I keep being changed? Some of that has to do with our habits and our practices, right? And we'll get to that in this book, but I wanted to read just from C.S. Lewis's book, The Screw Tape Letters. And if you're not familiar with that, it's basically these minions of Satan, these demons are trying to do what they do, which is draw people away from God, away from faith, to blind them to the beauty of the gospel, and to just wreak havoc on people's lives. Because that's what the enemy wants to do, is he wants to destroy your life. What is it? Steal, kill, and destroy. That's what Jesus said. So here's how C.S. Lewis puts it. In one of the Screw Tape Letters. This is chapter 2, and someone has converted, so to speak, to Christianity. Maybe they did a repeat after me prayer, maybe they raised their hand, maybe they walked an aisle, maybe they were at a crusade. And then one of the demons says to the other, there's no need to despair that this person has converted. Hundreds of these adults convert all the time. And he says, don't worry, all the habits of the patient are still in our favor. Like all this person's habits still belong to us. They're not worried about some kind of mental conversion, so to speak, because this person's habits are not going to align with what it looks like to follow Jesus. It's not going to change them. And eventually they're going to, flame out, so to speak. That's what Lewis is writing in this. And so I think for us, the call is to realize that our habits are forming us. We want our habits to shape and form us more and more into the image of Jesus. That doesn't just happen automatically. You don't just slide into sanctification, so to speak, you can test me on that. I mean, I think there's so much of us that wants to make sure we give all the credit and glory to God, and it's Him that's changing us, and that is all true.
Yes.
But you tell me, like, let's pull off the spiritual road for a second, and I'll talk about just physical health for a minute. And as long as I continue to fill my pantry with empty carbs and sugar and all the versions of it, and it's right there for the taking, and I don't change anything about my habits or my routines or my environment, I'm not going to lose weight. I'm not going to get in shape.
Yes.
So.
Yeah, I agree completely. And let me just be incredibly clear and sensitive. I am a product of like decisionism. Like I went down to an altar and like prayed a prayer, and God was so gracious to like still call me to follow Him and like use that. And so I just want to be clear that we know God does use that,
Absolutely.
will use that, has used that. And we want to just like reveal that there's so much more than just that. And if it stops there, that's where the danger is.
That's right.
So I just want to clarify that. And then I think it's helpful just for everyone, listeners, as you're reading this book and as you're listening to this podcast, to ask yourself, am I a Christian that's just like claiming that title because I said a prayer one time, or am I truly following Jesus? And if you're realizing the answer is like, no, I'm not. Like, I'm not apprenticing Jesus, I'm not truly following Him, then remember His invitation that is still extended to you today to come follow me. And so I think that's the invitation He gives to you today and gives to all of us kind of continually, as He's always inviting us to follow Him more and more fully into the life He made us for.
And how good is God to invite us into that and to help us along the way.
Yes. Yep. He is so gracious. All right. Well, we hope you guys enjoyed this conversation and enjoy reading the book, and we'll be back next week actually it won't be next week, in a few weeks. Look at the schedule.
Yes.
We'll be back eventually to talk about part 2. Thanks,
right.
guys.